All right, let's jump right into a puzzle that has basically broken economics for decades. It's a really simple question, on the surface at least, but the answer? Well, the answer forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew about how the economy actually works.
So here it is. For more than a century, why have stocks consistently paid out so much more than safe government bonds? Now look, we all get that stocks are riskier, right? And bonds are safe, so of course investors are going to want a bigger payday for taking on that risk. That's not the mystery. The real head-scratcher is just how much bigger that reward is. It's a number so large that for the longest time, our best economic models just couldn't make sense of it. And yeah, there's a fancy name for this gap. It's called the equity premium. You can think of it as the bonus you get for being brave, for putting your money in the wild world of stocks instead of playing it safe with a government bond. So the big question is, just how big are we talking here? Get this, the number, the one at the very center of this whole thing is 4.36%. And that's not just a one-off. That's the average extra return stocks gave you year after year for almost 150 years across 17 different countries. Now, to you and me, that might just sound like a number, but to an economist, that number is, well, it's just bizarrely high. It suggests that people are so terrified of risk that they'd have to be, hiding under their beds. It just doesn't match up with reality. And that's why they called it the equity premium puzzle. So why was this such a cold case for so long? Well, it's kind of like the detectives working on it were in two completely separate buildings and, they just weren't talking to each other. The entire field of economics was split right down the middle, each side looking at the problem in a totally different way. Okay, so in one corner you had the finance folks. They were all about investor psychology, risk and how people feel about money. But they kind of just assumed that company profits appeared out of thin air. Then in the other corner you had the macroeconomists. They were the ones building these super detailed models of the real economy, factories, workers, all that stuff. But they didn't really pay much attention to how Wall Street actually priced things. It's like one team had the lock and the other team had the key, but they never got in the same room. And that's how things stood until very recently. Two economists, Hang Bai and Lu Zhang, came along and said, you know what? This is crazy. They decided to build one single model that could finally connect these two separate worlds, a unified theory that could see the entire picture all at once, from what's happening in the factory to what's happening on the stock exchange. And what's so cool about this is that it's not just some small adjustment to the old ways of thinking. No, this thing is a complete working simulation of a mini economy. It's got it all. How companies actually make stuff, the real-world friction of trying to hire people, and how investors look at all that mass and try to figure out what a company's stock is really worth. It finally connects all the dots. So they build this amazing new model, they turn it on, and something incredible pops out. One single factor, one little piece of real-world messiness that all the old models had ignored, turns out to be the key, the smoking gun, and it was hiding in plain sight the whole time. It all comes down to how we get paid. The technical term is wage inertia, but you've probably heard it called sticky wages, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Just think about your own job. If your company has a rough couple of months, do they just slash your salary? Of course not, right? Paychecks are sticky. They don't go down easily. And that one simple observation from the real world, that turns out to be everything. Okay, so check out what this means when the economy hits a rough patch. Let's say a company's overall output drops by, say, 1.5%. Not great, but not a disaster. But because wages are sticky, they barely move, they only drop by maybe 0.4%. So what happens to the money that's left over? The profits? They get absolutely hammered. They fall by 4.6%. That stickiness basically acts like a giant lever, turning a small economic wobble into a massive gut punch for company profits. And this is exactly what the researchers themselves pointed out. Because of those sticky wages, profits are way more volatile. They swing up and down way more dramatically than the economy as a whole. And this magnified procyclicality, that's their term, is precisely what makes owning stocks so risky. The cash that companies can actually pay out to their shareholders becomes super unpredictable. The risk isn't just that the economy might go down, it's that the company's payroll amplifies that risk into something much, much bigger. All right, so the theory is beautiful, right? It makes perfect sense. But here's the million-dollar question, or maybe the 4.36% question. Does it actually work? When they run the numbers, does this new model spit out the magic number that we see in nearly 150 years of history? And the answer is a resounding yes. It's almost spooky how accurate it is. Remember, the real-world historical number's 4.36%.
The model's prediction? 4.27%. I mean, come on. That is unbelievably close, and it nails stock volatility pretty well too. This was a huge moment. For the very first time, we had a model that could solve the puzzle by connecting what happens on Main Street with jobs and wages to what happens on Wall Street.
So, mystery solved. Case closed. We can all go home, right? Well, not so fast, because in the process of building this powerful new tool, the researchers stumbled onto something else, something much bigger, and, to be honest, something way more disturbing.
See, once you understand why stocks are so risky, you can start to calculate the real cost of that risk, not just to investors, but to all of us. And what their model showed is that we have been getting the cost of recessions, well, we've been getting it completely and catastrophically wrong.
Hold on to your hats for this one. The model calculates that the true cost of economic ups and downs is a whopping 33.6%. What does that mean? It means the pain and disruption of recessions is so great that the average person would be willing to give up more than a third of everything they would ever consume in their entire life just to live in a world without them. I mean, that's a staggering number.
And just to give you some perspective on how revolutionary this is, the old estimate, the one that won a Nobel Prize, put that cost at just 0.05%. Basically nothing. It was so small that the general consensus was, recessions aren't that big a deal. It's not worth a huge effort to prevent them. This new model is screaming that the true cost is orders of magnitude higher. Just let that sink in for a second. The model that finally solved this decades-old financial puzzle is also telling us that the human cost of a recession is more than 670 times more painful than we thought. It turns out that the risk that investors are demanding that big premium for isn't some abstract financial concept. It's the very real, very painful risk of people losing their jobs and their livelihoods.
And so that leaves us with one final and frankly enormous question. That 4% puzzle? That was a fun little mystery for economists to solve. But this 33% conclusion? That's a challenge for every single one of us. Because if the real cost of a recession is that high, it changes everything. It means that preventing the next one isn't just a good idea. It's one of the most urgent priorities we have. What started out as a numbers puzzle ended up revealing a deeply human problem.